Hey, what's up? Welcome to the Matt Moscona YouTube channel. Do me a favor before we get started. Please hit the subscribe button if you've not done so yet. So this is going to be a video that my radio audience that I've been promising for a while, and I'm going to deliver here on the YouTube channel. And I hope that that you take time to share it, and I hope you learn something as well from this video. And I'll just set this as a preface to let you know that this is a deep dive. Like, this is a thing that's going to be information intensive, and it might be hard to understand. So maybe grab a glass of wine or a beer, hit pause, and then come back when you're ready to like really absorb everything I'm about to say. Because what I'd really like to explain is why college football is in the position it is right now, with the Power 5 conferences disagreeing and fractured, and so much of college football disjointed. To start this conversation, I'm going to warn you, okay? So, like, this is going to be a long, like, deep dive into this, okay? So you just have to follow me, if you would, with this. Where we're going to start, though, is with the biggest misconception that people have, and that is the Ncaa. People crush the Ncaa. They are an easy scapegoat, and trust me when I tell you, I'm in that group. I think the Ncaa is woefully inept, and I think at one point in their history, the Ncaa did serve a purpose. As a governing body that was formed to organize championships, the Ncaa has a purpose, and still does, by the way. The Ncaa is the governing body that organizes Division II cross-country national championships, and the College World Series, and the men's basketball national championship, and the lacrosse championship, and all of those things. And they do a wonderful job at organizing those events. What has outgrown the Ncaa clearly is college football, major college football, and men's college basketball, even though March Madness is still spectacular. If I could put this as plainly as possible, this is the hardest thing for people to understand. The Ncaa does not govern major college football. The Ncaa can make a unilateral decision about college baseball not having a championship, or college basketball not having a championship, or any other sport. But the Ncaa does not govern major college football. Here's the visual reminder I can give you. When you watch March Madness, or you watch the College World Series, or the Women's College World Series, or the Track and Field National Championship, when a national champion is crowned, what trophy do they get? They get that brown trophy, right, with the wide base, and it's a tall brown trophy. You've seen it, like at all these Ncaa events. When the football national championship happens, what trophy do they get? The crystal ball before, and now it's like the golden waffle cone for the college football playoff, because the Ncaa does not crown a champion. This is mind-blowing to many people, but college football has been around for 150 years. We just celebrated 150 years of college football, okay? So we just celebrated 150 years of college football. The Ncaa didn't come along too much later. Well, in the early days of college football, they formed these bowl alliances, and those became revenue generators for the bowl organizers, and they became a piece of the history of college football, and also financially beneficial for major college football. So major college football has never been governed by the Ncaa. Its championship and how it runs its season has never been organized by the Ncaa. The Ncaa is the legislative arm of major college football. So the leagues outsource to the Ncaa their punitive arm. So like the Ncaa creates the rules, and they can legislate, and they can try to enforce those rules. They're the enforcement arm of major college football, but they don't govern major college football. They don't make those decisions. Okay, so you got to understand that to begin with. This is not an Ncaa decision. Mark Emmert can't come down and unilaterally say all of major college football is off, like he can do with the other fall sports, like they did do in the spring with basketball and baseball and all the other spring sports. So that's where we got to start, understanding the Ncaa does not control this decision. So who does control the decision? That's the big question. Ultimately, you look at all of these different conferences as little fiefdoms that operate independent of each other. As we've seen, the SEC makes their own decision. The ACC makes their own decision. The Big 12, the Pac-10, or the Pac-12, the Big 10, Conference USA, the American Athletic Conference. Like, all of these leagues make their own decisions. And all of these leagues are made up of their membership, which has agreed to be part of this conference. But each league is made up of schools, and this is where the other part that people smirk when you hear like student athlete, the operative word there is student. These are still independent academic institutions where the president and chancellor of those independent universities make the decision for their university. Yes, they are members of conferences, and they're members of conferences because it's more lucrative. You can go negotiate bowl deals and television contracts and have more collateral as a group than you could independently. There are very few college football brands that can operate independently and be lucrative. Notre Dame is one of them. That's why they have their NBC deal and why they refuse to join a conference, because they can make all that money and not have to share it. But all of the teams in the SEC or particular leagues, together, they can negotiate better deals and make more money. So that's why they're in their leagues. But still, ultimately, decisions come down to individual universities. And the presidents and chancellors of those universities ultimately make those decisions, which is why we're at this impasse right now. So understand also who presidents are and chancellors of universities are. They're not sports fans, generally speaking. They're members of academia, of higher education. You have people, men and women, with multiple degrees, in many cases doctorate degrees, that are running institutions of higher learning. Their goal isn't to win national championships in football. Their goal is to get endowments and have the best geology department in the country, and to be a land, space, and sea grant university. Like, that's their ambition, not football. There are instances where you have university leadership that want to be involved in football decisions. When Mark Emmert was at LSU, that's a great example. That was a chancellor that understood the value of athletics to his institution, and he wanted to be in on those decisions. That's rare. Gordon Gee, formerly the president of Ohio State, who's now at West Virginia, he's one of those guys as well. But again, those are rare to find, those university presidents that are that ingrained in athletics. Largely, they see athletics as an arm of the university, but higher learning, education, that is the core of the university. And those are the people that are making these decisions. They're not making these decisions with the intent of thinking football or nothing, right? So now we get to the point of how we are where we are, that you understand who's making these decisions. It's the university presidents. Well, understand, every university president in every league has in different parts of the country has different realities that they face. Although LSU and UCLA and UConn and Washington and Florida and Arizona are all considered FBS programs, they're not all the same. And this is where college football structure has its biggest flaw. When you look at the FBS, the Football Bowl subdivision, FBS, the highest level of college football, views LSU and UConn, I'm just using UConn as an example, as the same. They're both in the FBS, the highest level of college football. But LSU and UConn are not even close to being the same thing. LSU annually is about $145 million athletic budget, with about $85 million of that revenue coming from football alone. UConn is a $30 million annual athletic budget, with roughly $2 million annually in revenue coming from football. So UConn is a football program that is actually subsidized by the university. LSU is independently runs itself. It requires no subsidiary funding from the university or the state. It is completely autonomous in funding. It is self-sufficient. It can fund itself. That's very rare. There's only a handful of universities and athletic departments in the country that are like that. where their athletic department can fund itself. Okay, but it's important to know this because this is where you get to these university presidents making decisions that are best for their university. Let's look at UConn in this example that I've given you. So, UConn football, UConn athletics, $30 million in annual revenue. In Storrs, Connecticut, football accounts for about $2 million of that revenue. The only way UConn is going to make money, generate revenue in football, is two ways. One, ticket sales. Two, guarantee games. So, in the COVID climate, if UConn can't go play the guarantee games where they get $1 million payouts to go play Power 5 teams, they lose that revenue. They lose one stream of revenue. The other stream of revenue would be ticket sales. Well, if you're playing in front of limited or no fans, now your revenue's gone to zero. 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 This is basic business economics. You cannot operate your business when you don't generate revenue because then you're operating at a loss. Let's say you own a t-shirt company, and every day when you open your doors, it's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you employees, it's going to cost you rent, it's going to cost you in your light bill, whatever. So going in, let's say you have to sell 10 t-shirts a day just to break even, just to make sure you cover your costs. Well, if in a given day you only sell 5 t-shirts, you lost money that day. Yes, you generated revenue, but you did not even generate enough revenue to cover your costs. So you actually lost money. So now let's look at this in the terms of athletics. If you're a university in the COVID climate, if you're a president, how can you justify playing college football operating at a loss, knowing that it's good? Like, you have no fans and you can't go play your guarantee games. So just by fielding a team, you are going to lose money in a climate where everybody's losing money. There isn't enough revenue at the university. There isn't enough donor dollars. There isn't enough money coming from state government as everything's being cut. When you're looking at ways to cut expenses, how can you justify playing a sport when just by fielding the team, you're going to lose money? Then look on top of that where Roman Banks is the Southern University athletic director. He came on my show about a little less than a month ago, when the SWAC announced that they were not going to play this season. And he was very candid and told me it was going to cost his athletic department $500,000, $500,000 in testing, in COVID testing. So remember, you're not playing your guarantee games. You're not going to have fans or have limited fans. You're trying to find ways to cut expenses, and now you're going to add a $500,000 expense just in testing? It doesn't make sense. So these university presidents and athletic directors have publicly said, we're not playing because health and safety of our student athletes. Realistically, though, it's a money deal for all of the smaller schools. They can't afford to play. It will cost them more money to play than to not play, which is why all of the smaller leagues have said, we're going to sit this out. Which brings us to the Power 5. The SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, the Big 10, the Pac-12. All of those major conference schools can afford to play college football this year. They can afford, even if they're operating at break even or with minimum fans in the stands because of their TV deals, they can afford testing and to go play college football this fall amid COVID. The question is, are they willing to? If you're a captain of a boat, of a ship, and you see that there's a storm ahead, there's 5 ships. All 5 ships are capable of making it through that storm. There's no question. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be very difficult. But you can, and there's going to be probably some collateral damage there, but you can make it through this storm and get to your destination. But not every captain has the same incentive to get to the other side. For some captains, it might be easier just to look and go, hey man, let's go park the boat and do this tomorrow when the storm passes. When other captains are like, hey man, we got to get there because if we don't go make this run, we all are out of our jobs and they're going to repossess my ship. Okay? That's the difference in major college football right now. Something that's often misunderstood is how these presidents that we talked about view their academic institutions and how wealthy they are. Regional influences matter also. Let me give you an example. The Big Ten is one of the leagues that is obviously pulled out of college football in the fall of 2020. The Big Ten is made up of traditionally very wealthy and prestigious academic institutions. The University of Michigan has a $12 billion endowment. Northwestern, their endowment north of $10 billion. Billion with a B. Ohio State, $6 billion endowment. Purdue, $5 billion endowment. Even Michigan State, which is a relatively small university in the Big Ten, Michigan State has a $3 billion endowment. By contrast, LSU, $500 million. Now, $500 million isn't anything to sneeze at, but the point is LSU is not a wealthy university. LSU is a university that relies on football as the doorstep of the institution to drive applications and brand awareness and revenue. It's massive, not just for LSU, but for Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in the same way that the University of Georgia is critical for Athens, Georgia, and Alabama is critical for Tuscaloosa, and Auburn University is critical for Auburn, Alabama, Gainesville, Knoxville, Columbia, South Carolina, Lexington, Kentucky. You get it over and over again. You understand the point. It's not the same for Northwestern in Evanston, which is a suburb of Chicago. The city of Chicago is going to do fine whether Northwestern plays or not, and Northwestern's wealthy enough and prestigious enough of an academic institution that if Northwestern doesn't play football this year, Northwestern University is going to be fine. Let's look in the Pac-12. UCLA, USC in Los Angeles, Cal, Stanford in the Bay Area, the University of Washington is in Seattle, Arizona State is in the greater Phoenix area, Utah's in Salt Lake City. All of those towns, regardless of whether those institutions I just mentioned play football, are going to be fine. The economy in Los Angeles doesn't rely on USC or UCLA football. They're a footnote there. And those institutions are very wealthy, independent of football. So come back to the point that I was just making a bit ago. Can the Pac-12 play football this year? Sure. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be very difficult. The same way it'd be very difficult for the SEC to play football this year. But their motivations are entirely different. And you're also talking about major cities in the West Coast that I just mentioned that are major hotspots for COVID right now. So it's much easier for their university leadership to say, yeah, let's just back out of this one this year and pick it up next year. Whereas in the SEC or the ACC in a town like Clemson, South Carolina, or Tallahassee, Florida, you don't really have that same luxury. The Chamber of Commerce for Bryan College Station, where Texas A&M is, they just released a study which estimated that that Texas A&M University is directly or indirectly responsible for 20% of that city's economy. 20% of that city's economy. That's a similar tale all around the Southeast. It's not so in Chicago or LA or Seattle or Phoenix. That's just the reality why it's so much more important for the Southern universities to play and not as important for the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. It's not an issue about health and safety of student athletes. It comes to an issue of, do you need to play? Is it worth your effort to go through the testing and all of the things that could happen to play? And the answer in the Southeast is yes. The answer for the Pac-12 and the Big Ten is no. Which brings us to one other point. Liability. That is one of the things that has, you've heard this often, it has scared many of the university presidents and academic leadership in some of these leagues. The liability that if one of their student athletes gets sick from COVID, could they potentially be liable? which is why it's so interesting that Big Ten parents have now taken on counsel to try to get the courts to allow the Big Ten parents to sign a waiver for their kids to play football. The Ncaa, when much of this started, said you can't do waivers. You cannot have your student athletes sign a waiver releasing you of responsibility for COVID. You cannot do that. Remember, the Ncaa is the enforcement arm of these leagues. Well, now Big Ten parents, because they want their kids to play, are saying, wait a minute, we'll sign a waiver. We're okay giving our kids the choice to play. And some may opt out, but give us the option. They're going to court, hopefully, over this matter. Justin Fields. There may not be a player, aside from maybe Trevor Lawrence, who has less to gain by playing this season than Justin Fields. Ohio State quarterback, he's a projected top 5 pick. Even if he doesn't play a down of football this fall, Justin Fields is still going to be a top 5 pick, and come April, he'll be a multimillionaire many times over. He started a petition on Sunday to allow, hopefully, to allow Big Ten players to play, for the conference to reverse its decision and allow the Big Ten universities to play. In a matter of hours, it was over 100,000 signatures. At the time you're watching this, I don't know where that number is, but it goes to show how much the players' voice and their parents are willing to waive liability to give them the choice. And still, university presidents are balking at that. Why? Liability? Embarrassment publicly? Not wanting to backtrack after your public statement was the health and safety of our student athletes is of the utmost importance, and that's why we can't let them play. And now you're going to backtrack on that when you're at, purportedly an institution of higher learning? That's why we're at this crossroads. The major issue is that college football has no unilateral leader. You hear people say college football needs a commissioner or a czar, et cetera, et cetera. And that's reality. They do. And you can look around other sports and say, well, look at all these leagues that aren't playing, these other college sports that aren't playing. But look at all the sports that are. Major League Baseball, the NBA, the WNBA, the MLS, NHL, NFL is getting ready to start, international baseball, UFC, boxing, horse racing, NASCAR, IndyCar. All of these sports are playing. And I know what you're going to say, Matt. You're going to say, Matt, the commonality is those are all pro sports. Yes, they're all pro sports with the resources and willingness to go through that storm. The only college sport that closely resembles a pro sport is major college football because of the revenue and the resources. They can operate in the same way that all of these professional sports are operating to get on the field. But are university presidents willing to acknowledge essentially that major college football does resemble more of a pro sport, and now you open up a gigantic Pandora's box of where does college football and college athletics go from this point? And also, are they willing to waive the liability or assume the liability that could come along with some of their student athletes getting sick? And right now, because they went forward with health and safety of student athletes is of the utmost importance to us, that's the banner the flag that they waved. It is almost impossible to walk back from that and say, yeah, it's actually not as important as we thought. That's why college football is at this crossroads, because every university president is making a decision independent of each other, what's best for them and their university, not what's going to allow their football team to play, but what's going to allow their academic institution to continue on at whatever rate there is. And that's not for the greater good of college football. And that is the problem right now that major college football has. It needs a leader. It needs a commissioner. It needs someone who can make a unilateral decision and be one singular voice that everybody can look to and say, this is how we're proceeding. The problem is, for all the reasons I just said, UConn isn't the same as LSU. Athens, Georgia isn't the same as Los Angeles, California. And for all those reasons and many other ones I stated here, you'll never get every college football program all to align together on the same page for one greater good and commonality. But it's the bed that they made, and now they have to lay in it. Because all college football programs have benefited financially from this structure. Because the University of Louisiana at Lafayette could play 3 or 4 non-conference games against Power 5 teams and ultimately fund its athletic department, and LSU or whatever Power 5 program in playing those games could line up 2 or 3 more home games per year where they can get a $9-10 million gate, line their pockets with a game they have no risk of losing or very little risk of losing, and they can make a bunch of money. The only ones that take it up the yin-yang there are the fans. The fans have no desire to see that game. Nobody wants to watch a major program against directional school U. Nobody wants to watch Ohio State against Bowling Green or LSU against Nichols, but LSU gets a big gate from that game, and Nichols gets a payday that allows them to fund their athletic department. Those decisions were made based out of greed, and ultimately, it's like living off of credit. There's no reason ever why an FBS Group of 5 program should be paying its head coach millions of dollars a year, but it does it in a keeping up with the Joneses type world. In reality, what we should see is the preeminent programs have their own league, and then let the Group of 5 crown their own champion and play each other. But they don't want to do this over here because it's never going to be as lucrative as when they can sneak over here and get money from playing the big boys. And the big boys are willing to line their pockets with those games that they have very little risk of losing and that they can just take another gate on a couple or 3 times per year. So college football has built a structure where everybody gets really wealthy off of the structure the way it is until COVID-19 comes along and pops the bubble, which is why we are where we are. And my hope is that through all of this, ultimately, this is the moment in time that exposes the college sports and mainly college football structure for what it is, an impossibly flawed model, and allows college football to break free of Title IX and exist independently, where student athletes can make money on their name, image, and likeness, universities and athletic departments can still generate the revenue that they do, and the fans no longer have to watch awful games that they don't care to see, and instead can watch only Power 5 versus Power 5 games. It will be a better product for everybody. And some of you are going to say, but Matt, what are the little schools going to do to fund their athletic department? Live within your means. It's not LSU's job to fund ULM's program. It's not Ohio State's job to fund Bowling Green's program. You know what you do if you make $30,000 a year? You don't drive a Mercedes. If you're an athletic department that generates $25-30 million a year, you don't pay your football coach $2 million per year. You pay your football coach what you can afford to pay him, because the reality is you will never be an elite level program ever. Even as programs like Boise State have risen in popularity and notoriety over the years, they're still never going to be a national championship contender consistently ever. Accept that reality and move through it. That's my hope of what will come of the whole COVID-19 shutdown that we've seen in major college sports. Hope that shed some light on the situation. I told you this was going to be long-winded. I told you this was going to be a deep dive. If you got questions, you made it to the end, thank you. Please subscribe to the video. Leave questions or comments below. I'd love to interact. You can always find me on Twitter as well, at Matt Moscona, Moscona. Y'all have an awesome night.